Primal movements are embedded in our DNA. They are rooted in evolutionary history, and they are hardwired through our genetic makeup with one sole purpose, and that is to keep our bodies prepared for survival.
Welcome to the Dr. JJ Thomas Podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Dr. JJ Thomas Podcast. I'm JJ. Nice to be with you here today, especially on this day. I'm really excited about this episode. This episode, I am going to gift you guys with literally the nuts and bolts and all the foundational concepts that made Primal what it is today. So we're going to get into all the theoretical models and all of the different conceptual ideas that really led me to both name this company Primal Physical Therapy and in the first place, and create the method, the Primal Method, that we've been so fortunate to have such success with in our company, and also more importantly, have so much success with our patients every day in the results they're getting. So I want to share that with you guys. That's what we've been doing. If you've already taken our Primal Foundations course online or in person, or already taken our Primal Integrations course, then you have an idea of what I'm talking about. If you haven't taken any of those, this is going to hopefully give you a very clear, concise perception, at least, of the things we do here. So we're going to get right into it. I will say before I get going, some of the concepts are heavy. Some of the content is intricate and deep, and you're going to have questions, and I welcome them. I really would love to hear from any of you in any avenues we have. You can leave a comment in the description. You can reach out to me on social media, DM me. This is the entire purpose of this podcast, and the work I'm doing with Primal University is to help physical therapists treat their patients better, get better results, and just thrive in their business and in life. So with that said, reach out to me anytime you have any questions. We're going to start with the primal movement. The concept of primal movement, and I'm going to take it a step back further, and let's talk about why I chose the name Primal in the first place. When I was opening my company, I really opened Primal in 2013. I opened my first brick and mortar shop in 2015, but when I was coming up with the name Primal, it was very important to me that I came up with a name. I think it's always important in branding that your brand represents what you stand for. It represents something that makes you unique and differentiates you from other people in your profession. And so I thought long and hard, and I researched all kinds of words, and some were okay. And the word primal, when I came across it, really hit me in many different ways. I would be lying if I didn't express to you that part of the reason I like the name Primal is that sort of edge it has. I love that it gives the imagery of primitive life and evolutionary concepts. But a big bonus for me really was the fact that the word primal actually means first. And what you'll see through today's episode is that there are many reasons of significance that first or foundational movements are really important and critical to the way our body is intended to function as a whole. From the word primal, let's get to, we throw this word primal around in everything in our company, right? We're Primal Physical Therapy. We talk about primal movements. We have Primal University. We have the Primal Mentorship Program. And again, that is with intention. I've done that because primal, the connotation and the imagery that you get with the word primal is exactly what I want to display. Let me tell you why. And we're going to start with first explaining what primal movements really are. Primal movements are embedded in our DNA. They are rooted in evolutionary history, and they are hardwired through our genetic makeup with one sole purpose, and that is to keep our bodies prepared for survival. When we analyze our embryologic development, we look at how we develop in utero, what we see when we study our embryologic development, and we look at the way we develop in utero, is that everything from the way our cells are genetically coded to the sequence and design of our embryologic development is brilliantly engineered to create an intricate and complex system that's made up of multiple systems And those systems are reliant on each other and interdependent on each other for them to perform efficiently. Collectively, those systems work together to create a complicated but powerful armor for our bodies. This armor is the musculoskeletal system. Now, the musculoskeletal system encases our organs, and the purpose of that is to provide structural protection of our organs and our organ systems. But it does more than that. In addition to the structural support, the musculoskeletal system provides functional support to all the other systems. And it does this primarily through pressure regulation and through fluid dynamics. The physiologic design of our bodies is like a symphony of instruments. Together, these systems, like a symphony of instruments, play a very unique tune. And this intricate network working together allows our bodies to frequently and consistently provide cellular repair so that we can function effectively. This cellular repair is critical, and it must happen consistently and regularly in order to promote our body's performance, our longevity, and ultimately survival. What I will show you throughout this episode is that this armor, this system that we have, especially the musculoskeletal system in particular, plays a critical role in both the structural support of our organ systems, but also the physiologic function support of all the other systems. Ultimately, keeping the systems, all the systems running well are going to help us stay alive. I will also show you how when we regularly integrate primal movement patterns into our daily lives, this nourishes our bodies with the support to the musculoskeletal system, and therefore all the other systems, that we need to foster proper fluid dynamics, great cellular repair, healthy organ systems, efficient movement patterns, preventing breakdown and injury, and again, ultimately living longer, happier lives doing the things we want to do. This is where primal movements are really pivotal and a pivotal piece to your practice and mine. We're going to talk in a little bit, we're going to break down a little bit more some of the other pieces that made the primal name so integral to our practice, and especially, it's not really the name, but what primal means in terms of how we're treating our patients. And so from that intro, what I want to take us now to is, we've talked about the primal method. Let's define the primal method. As I said, if you've been to my courses, then you've heard this in some way, shape, or form. But I want those of you who haven't experienced it yet to have a better understanding. So the definition of the primal method is that it is a systematic approach to evaluating and treating the body in a way that honors the evolutionary and embryologic origins of our structures and uses a regionally interdependent model to restore and optimize our movement, physiological processes, and prevent injury and breakdown over time. So that's the definition. I mean, essentially, the primal method, it's a regionally interdependent model that's helping you analyze the body from a systems perspective and a whole body movement assessment approach. And the underlying components of that are critical, and we're going to go into them in detail in a little bit, are the concepts that we have to honor and recognize the fact that the reason we move the way we move and the reason our bodies are designed the way they're designed go all the way back to evolutionary history, our embryologic development, and what I'm going to show you in a little bit also relate to the way we move and learn to move from 0 to 3 years of life. So with that, let's talk about how do we do the primal method, right? Like when you come and you do a mentorship with me, how do we do this? The first of these principles is that we are going to recognize that our body is innately and inherently designed for one main function, and that is survival. When we recognize that, we start to be able to put together all the pieces of the learning we've had through the years from various educators and methods and reading to our own experiences with our own movements. But there are three basic categories that fall under this critical concept that our bodies are built for survival. The first of which is what I alluded to earlier. Our musculoskeletal system is designed to support our organ systems. Let's talk through this for a second. Just from a merely structural standpoint, we have bony protection throughout almost our whole body. We have the skull protecting our brain, right? We have the spine protecting our spinal cord. We have the rib cage protecting our heart and our lungs. We have the pelvis protecting our reproductive organs and some of our genitourinary organs. Now, we get to the abdominal region, and we don't have a bony protection. We have a muscular sling, right? It's an intricate muscular sling. It's not a single, circumferential sling. It's not a ace bandage wrapped around in one direction. It's intricately woven in many different directions. Why would we be formed that way if only we can start to recognize that second purpose, which is to provide a physiological function support. And remember what I said in the beginning, that the body's systems, these multiple systems are interconnected and interdependent on each other. That muscular sling becomes pivotal in regulating the pressure control centrally so that we have good fluid dynamics peripherally. So that's the first piece, recognizing our the structure of the musculoskeletal system and why and how it is designed to help us survive from an evolutionary perspective. The second piece of this understanding of our musculoskeletal system and how we're inherently designed is to recognize that if we expect to live long, if we expect to survive, our bodies are engineered in a way that is constantly under maintenance. That maintenance is in the form of cellular repair. This cellular repair is, as I said, critical to our bodies being able to perform and survive and continue to take the hits from everything throughout the day. That cellular repair is critical. If we look at the data of our cells and how often they repair, well, first of all, let's just talk about, remember how I said how important fluid dynamics are? If we look at our body and we analyze how much of our body is fluid, 25% to 30% of our body is fluid. So those fluid dynamics are critical. We wouldn't have a quarter to a third of our body made up of something that was not important. The reason the fluid dynamics are so important is because they help us funnel the nutrients we need to repair the cells in a very efficient way when they're working properly. The data on how frequently our cells repair, essentially in one day, 330 billion cells repair in a day. And in 80 to 100 days, it's like 3 trillion. That's huge turnover, right? That the reason behind that is because our body has to continue to be refueled. We're like a race car. Every day we're going, we go to sleep, guess what? Bedtime, sleep time, REM time, the time recovery time, you're in the pit. All of our little cells are hard at work with their cool little jackets on, they're hidden in the car, they're repairing the cells. We need that cellular repair. And it's not gonna happen if our pressure system is not providing the adequate amount of fluid dynamics to flush through all the systems. This is what I mean when I say our bodies are an intricate and complicated system that are made up of multiple systems that are reliant and interdependent on one another in order to serve their function of survival. Now, the third piece of our structure, of our musculoskeletal system, that is a requirement of this concept that our purpose of the musculoskeletal system is survival. The third piece of this is mobility. And honestly, most people think that's our only job in physical therapy. I think that's crap, to be honest. I don't know how else to say it. I think that's small-minded, and I think we need to do better for our patients. Yes, mobility is so important, and I'm gonna tell you how important mobility is to survival. Let's think about evolutionary days. Let's think about today. Mobility is important for two main reasons. Number one, we have to have the capacity to move our butts over to get the nutrients we need to feed the cells. I had a conversation, to feed the particles, the cells that we need to make the cellular repair. I had a conversation with a patient just the other day. She was getting laser for her elbow, and she's only been in a couple times, and she's having some improvement, but she's like about my age woman, and she was talking about her chronic elbow tendonitis, and she had seen Eric, and she was having some improvements, and we had another conversation, a side conversation though, because she said, how should I expect to feel after this laser? I said, well, you should feel improvement in about 4 hours to 24 hours. I said, but let's talk about this. How's your protein intake? Because the truth is, if we're not taking in the nutrients to have the building blocks to make the cells repair, it doesn't matter how much laser I put on it, doesn't matter how much dry needling I do to it, doesn't matter how many exercises I give her, she's not gonna get better. So we had a really intimate conversation about ways she can up her protein. She was only getting 30 grams of protein a day. 30 grams of protein when the recommendation is a 1-to-1 body weight, essentially. So whatever your body weight is, you want to try to eat 1 gram of protein for every pound of body weight that you have. If you want more information on that, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon is a stud and has great information in her book, Forever Strong, and all over the internet. So check her out. But my point being that we need the mobility to get the nutrients. So I can have this conversation with my patient and say, you need to have closer to 100 grams of protein. The real truth is, since she was only getting 30, I said, look, let's give you an attainable goal. Let's get you to 70. I said, do an extra protein shake in the morning, do a protein shake in the afternoon, get an extra 40 grams of protein. Let's see how you feel, and then we'll go from there. Attainable goals. But the musculoskeletal system is important in being able to go get the dang thing, right? Because if we let our bodies go and we don't support our musculoskeletal system, and now we're kind of in a chair all day long, and it is so much effort to get up and go get that protein shake because my body hurts and I'm tired and I don't have the ability to repair my cells. This is when it becomes a very vicious cycle. And this is when patients downward spiral, and we've all seen it, and they don't know how to get out of it. It is our job to think out of the box and get out of our own way and not just talk to them about what exercises they should be doing or what technique we should be doing to them, but remembering we have to treat the body as a system. That's gonna bring me to my next point in a second, but before I do, the other piece of mobility is we gotta be able to flee from danger, right? If somebody comes in my office right now, I have two options. I can either jump on the mat with them and try to choke them out, or I can run the heck out the back door. But if I don't have good mobility, I'm not gonna be able to save myself. So survival, everything comes down to survival. It's the muscular, it's the structural and functional support through our musculoskeletal system. It is the ability to provide nourishment for our cells to repair. And it is the ability to stay and maintain mobility, and by that I also mean stability, so that we can flee from danger and also go get our dang food for nourishment, right? So those are some of the foundational principles of the Primal Method. Those concepts bring me to my second point, my second principle in the Primal Method, which is that our body is innately and inherently meant to function as an interconnected system. This is not anything new to you. We said this, I've spent the first 10 minutes essentially saying that. But the additional piece of that is, I want you to think of it like this. The whole is way greater than the sum of its parts, right? I think personally, and I think most of you will probably agree with me, one of the biggest problems with our medical world right now, it's starting to turn with some of the great minds out there, but for the last 10 years, unfortunately, our medical world was falling into this area of specialization. And now don't get me wrong, specialization is important. I specialize in movement, I specialize in dry needling, I specialize in a lot of things, but you can't specialize in something and not zoom out and look at the big picture when you're treating a system. So one of the biggest principles in our primal courses are that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We can't just analyze, like for example, my girl the other day with the tennis elbow. We can't just analyze the elbow from a mechanical perspective and not consider what's happening on a cellular level to her, because we're not going to get her better if we don't look at the whole system. So let's talk about, when I say earlier on, I said our body is an intricate and complicated system made up of multiple other systems that are reliant and interdependent on one another. So what are those systems? Let's review them all. We talked a lot about the musculoskeletal system. We have the cardiovascular system. We have the neurological system. We have the integumentary system, the skin. We have the gastrointestinal system. We have the renal system. We have the reproductive system. So all of these systems are interconnected, right? And don't just take my word for it. What we're going to do is I'm going to go through some studies that are out of the typical physical therapy arena, but that's my point. We got to get out of our box a little bit, guys. We got to start looking at other fields, other systems, if we're really going to treat the body as a whole interconnected system, the way it was originally designed, evolutionarily, embryologically. We have to get out of our little box. So this particular study, it was actually written in relationship to abdominal compartment syndrome. It was written by Popowitz and their group. We'll link it in the notes below. It was updated in 2023, so very recent. What they did is they looked at the effects of intra-abdominal hypertension. And intra-abdominal hypertension is described as intra-abdominal pressures that elevate anything greater than 20 millimeters of mercury, okay? So, on a drastic progression of that, progression for the worse, that would be considered abdominal compartment syndrome. This is something that can happen due to trauma, due to surgery sometimes. Sometimes sometimes I do think it's insidious onset, but the point is, if we're gonna analyze this system, and we talked about how important the pressure regulation and fluid dynamics are on the systems, let's take this case. So this article by Popowitz in 2023, I'll tag you in it, it measured changes in all the different systems in patients that had intra-abdominal hypertension. In what they found is in the cardiovascular system, they had decreased venous return, they had decreased cardiac output, and they had essentially increased compression of the inferior vena cava through the pressure system, right? That was the mechanism of how there was decreased venous return and decreased cardiac output. Not a good thing for our bodies or for survival, right? They also looked at pulmonary effects. So from a respiratory effect, they found decreased pulmonary volume, increased pulmonary resistance, which means they had difficulty breathing. They had increased airway resistance, essentially. So obviously, how can you ventilate? How can you get oxygen in? Talk about not having the cells, not having the building blocks needed to repair the cells. If we don't have oxygen, how can we feed our muscle tissue? How can we feed any tissue, essentially? On that same note, when they looked at renal functioning in patients with intra-abdominal hypertension, they found that there was a change in their glomerular filtration rate. I knew I was going to have a hard time saying that, but actually I think I did pretty well. I'll give myself an A-. And the glomerular filtration rate, with that change, what they found is that some patients were actually, many of them were more predisposed to renal failure. And a lot of them had decreased urine output as a result of this filtration rate change. And from a GI perspective, the gastrointestinal system, what they found is that there was an increased predisposition towards tissue hypoxia. And in addition to that, they had a higher risk of having a bacterial infection as well. All from these changes in intra-abdominal pressure, right? So taking an article from out of our typical realm and looking at how it applies to us as humans and how it applies to our ability to survive is really important. And take it another level as physical therapists. How does this apply to us directly? Actually, we're going to get there in a bit. This particular study applies to us directly because it proves that we are all an interconnected system. And if we're going to treat a patient effectively, we can't just think linearly. We have to think in a complex manner the way we were designed. I'm going to give you an opposing study now that actually supports our role in physical therapy and will demonstrate to you the very critical role of the musculoskeletal system in, as I said previously, the structure and function of all of our organ systems. This second study was done in 2015, but it's really relevant to what we do as physical therapists. Again, I'll tag it in the show notes. This one was on orthostatic hypotension. And just to refresh your memory, in case you're an orthopedic physical therapist like I was, orthostatic hypotension is defined as a greater than 20 millimeter mercury drop in systolic pressure or a equal to or greater than 10 millimeter mercury drop in diastolic pressure when someone's standing. So this study looked at people who had orthostatic hypotension and characterized and defined by that criteria. And then they measured the change in their orthostatic hypotension after using a patient-controlled abdominal bracing mechanism. Boom, right? We talked together about how important the abdominal slings and the beautiful design of our musculature in all these different patterns to give us the ability to pressure regulate, right? Orthostatic hypotension a lot of times is happening because this pressure system is faulty. It's no mistake that when hospitals are bracing patients with external abdominal braces, that their orthostatic hypotension gets better. So now let's take this to a population of patients that don't have orthostatic hypotension. Let's take it to a population of patients who have swelling in their legs, or they just have a hard time gaining grip strength, right? We know that grip strength is very highly correlated to survival rates. Let's consider the fact that even our muscles of our grip are reliant and interdependent on the other systems. And if this pressure system, as it relates to our vascular system, our cardiovascular system, our lymphatic system, how about our dural fluid system, our cerebrospinal fluid system? They're all fluid dynamics. And so if any of those are off, we can grip squeeze all day long, but if we don't have core strength, if we don't have true core stability, we're not going to get anywhere. So my plea to you is to get out of the linear box. Let's start opening up other conversations and other ideas about all these other systems and how we can more effectively treat our patients and, by the way, treat ourselves by adopting a mindset that isn't dumbed down, isn't linear, and instead treats the whole because it's way greater than the sum of its parts. So how do we take this information, right? Like, if you're anything like me, you are eating this up because all of a sudden, boom, so much stuff makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, sign up for the Primal Foundations course because I promise you it makes sense. But it is a lot and it is complicated. And probably what you're thinking next is, JJ, how in the world do we take these concepts, these very complex concepts, and use this information to analyze our patients and to give our patients tools that they can integrate into their lives and actually get better? This is where the third principle comes in. The third principle basically honors and acknowledges the fact that we are a very complex, intricate system, right? And that this system is based off those evolutionary and embryological influences. In Primal Foundations, I go through in detail how we form in the utero, much of which I learned through both DNS concepts, dynamic neuromuscular stability, and the book Muscles and Meridians by Philip Beach. Great read. It's an intense read, but it has a lot of the embryological developmental phases that help to explain how and why our body is connected the way it is. For example, the way we fold in the embryo, I'll give a couple brief examples, but Primal Foundations has it all in depth. the way we start off as a flat disc in the embryo against the uterine wall. At about 8 weeks, we start a folding process. And our body in the folding process basically goes from two-dimensional to the three-dimensional kidney shape that we all know and love to think of as babies. In that process, essentially our heart moves to the center so that the ribs can engulf it and encase it and protect it like we talked about earlier. Our gut tube goes from flat, it's flat, the cells are flat, and then they go to this round cylindrical structure so that our gut tube essentially goes from mouth to anus. There's lots and lots of things that happen during this folding process that organize our organ systems so they have that protective structure around them. But what's even crazier is when you watch the folding processes, what we start to see are the things that are in alignment with what Tom Myers in his anatomy trains has pointed out, and that we have all these fascial connections that go, the ventral line from the muscles of the feet up through the posterior tib, up through the adductors, iliopsoas, diaphragm, all the way up to the swallowing muscles and the tongue, right? This is a real thing. It has been proven on cadaver studies, and we all see it and know it when you start to practice that way. So recognizing all these things are interconnected and relate to how we were formed in the embryo are important. Now, how do we bring back those movements, right? If you're listening to this and you're like, okay, great, JJ, I'm with you. You've proven to me that our body's an interconnected system. You've proven to me that our musculoskeletal system is paramount in supporting all the other organs and that all the systems are interconnected, right? How do we take this very huge concept and put it into a perspective that our patients can know and learn from? Guess what? We did it from the time we were 0 to 3, and we did 0 to 3 years of life, and we did it innately, and we did it inherently without even thinking about it, because it is hardwired in our genetic makeup to learn to move in specific developmental criteria and milestones. One of the reasons we go from quadruped to bipedal is because it is faster. When we look at studies that analyze how babies are learning to walk, there's a couple things that stand out from one study in particular that I'll try to add in the show notes as well. Two things that are relevant to our talk today. One is that they looked at babies, not 1-year-olds, learning to walk, and they measured how many times they fell down and got up in an hour. And in an hour, they fell down and got right back up 17 times in 1 hour. 17 times. How many patients do like 3 of one exercise and they get so frustrated because they're like, I can't do this, right? We have to learn things. Learning takes falling. Learning takes failing a little bit. When you're babies, you don't care. You're like, I am genetically hardwired to move this way. I am not going to get frustrated that I fell down. I'm going to get up. I'm going to do it again, right? It is innate within us. It is in our DNA. That's what one of the first things I said to you is primal movements are in our DNA. They are rooted in evolutionary history. They are hardwired through our genetic makeup. Babies fall down, they get up, no biggie. Why do they keep going? Because we're faster when we go on 2 feet. And that serves that purpose of survival so that when that person comes in the door, I'm not trying to crawl out, right? Now, the catch is we're faster on 2 feet. But if you think about the developmental milestones we had to get to earn the right to run and walk on 2 feet, most of those start from head to toe. So when we look at primal movements, when we analyze with the Primal Method, we use developmental milestones as our hierarchy of helping patients restore their primal, first, or foundational movement patterns. Let's talk about developmental milestones for a minute, because if you're like me and you're in the orthopedic world and you haven't been thinking about this as long as I have over the last 10 to 13 years, then you might be trying to remember the sequencing, right? Think about babies. They're born, and again, it's reflexive. They are swallowing, first of all, they're swallowing in utero. They are starting to develop their swallowing muscles in utero. So As I said in reference to the Tom Myers thing, the swallowing muscles are tied to the core. They're tied to the through the deep ventral line. So those swallowing muscles are already starting to work on their core, which is relevant because we know the core is so important for the other systems to function. But their baby's born, they root to their mother's breast if the mother's breastfeeding, and they swallow. They start to feed and nourish themselves for all those other purposes of survival, right? They also turn their head to do so. So now we're talking about motor milestones, swallowing and head and neck control, right? And then shortly after that, you bring the baby home. Their head's still pretty weak, but you start to realize you don't want them to get a flat head, so you start having them on tummy time. Tummy time produces scapular stability and more head control. When they're on their tummies, prone like this, they're getting erector spinae activation. They're getting muscle activation from their head all the way down to their tailbone. They're starting to look at their mom and toys around them. They're starting to work their obliques and rotational patterns. It is all genetically inherent within us. And then, only after they've established this strong foundation from the neck flexors and the swallowing muscles to the spinal erectors to the scapular stabilizers, only then do they start to even think about sliding one knee up or rolling from their back to their belly or their belly to their back. But this part, this head, neck, and scapular region has to come first. So first movements are prioritized from the time we're 0 to 3 years of life, and they're done so in a way that's inherent and genetically coded within us. So why, I ask you, when we become bipedal and we get all cocky and we're running around and we're so fast, and then then we get a job or we go to school and we sit, and we stop training these patterns. That is why we start to break down. We have to train the patterns. The primal movement patterns are the very same patterns that we first used to gain movement efficiency for survival. So when we start to retrain those, we're going to have a really long, happy life. We're going to be able to support our organ systems, both structurally and functionally. By the way, our muscles, our musculoskeletal system, will be supported and integrated more efficiently. And so we won't have those aches and pains as much. We won't be getting the tendinopathies and the tendinitises and the bursitis and the rotator cuff tears and all of these things, because we're bringing back our primal, our foundational, our strong, our first movement patterns. When we get those back, then life gets better. As clear and concise as I can make it in an episode of a podcast, I shared with you all the nuts and bolts, all the concepts that really played a huge role in the evolution, pardon the pun, but evolution of my own process that led me to the Primal Method, that led me to the name Primal. Because really what I value for my patients, for myself, for all of you, is reestablishing those primal first foundational movements. Thanks so much for joining me. As I said, please reach out. I'm sure some of you will have questions, and I look forward to talking with you.